Hi, you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph. And tonight, once again, Lucas is a poopy head. Lucas, for those who don't know, my co host Lucas is a high school teacher and he is helping run a concert. He co runs the theater department at his high school. And so he's helping with a concert, but that's okay because I have such an awesome guest. Between the two of us, we make more than make up for Lucas's absence. My guest tonight is Avalyn Inyan. Avalyn found the SCA in 2007 when a college friend joined an SCA Facebook group and she thought it sounded like fun. At her first event with the barony of Ancrecer, she accidentally became the baronial bard and has been performing in the SCA ever since. After several years in Ancrecer, I hope I'm saying that right, and
On
after
Crossra.
Crossra, all right, and after college, the barony of Darkwater, where she worked as a baronial and kingdom herald and participated in Bardic, she left Trimaris in 2011 to join the Air Force and spent the next 9 years traveling the known world. She spent time in Caid, Outlands, Onstiora, and Drachenwald. During that time, she became acquainted with a variety of performance activities of the known world, attending Gulf Wars and Pennsic many times. She served as Kingdom Arts Side Deputy for Performing Arts in Onstiora, where she started the Onstioran Choir and a Commedia troupe, as well as hosting a variety of performing arts classes from improv to Bardic, as well as bringing Bardic madness to Onstiora. At Pennsic, she has performed with the Known World Choir, Choralis Pensicus, Known World Players, and E Verdi Confusi, as well as participating in a variety of expos from the Harp Expo to the Bardic Expo. She now works as a deputy to the Performing Arts Department as the coordinator for the theater track, which she helped create in Pennsic 47. In 2020, Avalyn returned to Trimaris from Drachenwald just in time for the pandemic. She worked on the staff of the Bardic Madness online edition and then became involved as the logistics coordinator for the first Bardic War, where she helped develop the competition categories and judging criteria, as well as running a majority of the behind the scenes work, from scheduling to coordinating judges to communications to participants. In 2021, she took over as the Kingdom Artside Deputy for Trimaris Royal University, which she ran online after the Bardic War, and with the return to in-person events, is now starting both a choir and commedia troupe in Trimaris. Good grief, woman! Welcome, Avalyn.
Thank you. Glad to
Wow,
be here.
you like have just jumped right into the SCA, both feet. No, right in the deep end. No shallow section for you.
I mean, who wants to paddle when you can dive right in?
Yes, yeah. So you talked a little bit in your bio about how you found the SCA. Tell me more.
So I actually stumbled into the SCA for the first time when I attended the Hogtown Medieval Fair while I was in college, and I now, after joining the SCA, recall that I had wandered into their expo tent and chatted with people and thought it looked really cool, but then didn't really follow up with it. Just kind of forgot about it until my friend joined this Facebook group for the SCA, and I said, "Oh wait, that's that thing that I saw at the naval fair." So I messaged her and I was like, "Take me to a meeting." So she took me to a meeting, and I started going every week to meetings. And within the 2 or 3 months, the barony happened to have their own event, and that's what got me started.
So which barony were you in?
So that was the barony of Crossra, which is based out of Gainesville, Florida. I
Okay.
was a student at University of Florida at the time.
So, I've heard some things about Trimaris being a little different SCA wise. Not in a bad way, but just I mean, having lived down in Miami for 3 years, I can't imagine wanting to fight in that heat and humidity, of course. Tell me what your experience was like living in Trimaris.
Well, I definitely was not a fighter or interested in even remotely fighting in weather like this. So I was like, oh, rapier maybe sounds cool, but man, it's hot. So I think that directed me towards uh, the other parts of the SCA. I think every kingdom is different, and Trimaris will always be my first home and my first love in the SCA. But it's definitely a unique experience compared to other kingdoms, because there's not many other kingdoms where you can go to an event every single weekend of the year and probably never drive more than 3 hours. So I was able to go to multiple events a month. I mean, my first year, I probably went to 20 events because they just were all local. The Kingdom events were all in Ocala at the time. So I was, an hour and a half drive to those events, and I could go to Jacksonville or I could go to Tampa in 2 hours. And a lot of the baronies in Trimaris are all kind of central Florida located. Right now, all of our Kingdom events are held at a site that's about 40 minutes from my house. So very easy to get there. But it definitely gave a unique start.
And now you live in Onstiora.
No, I am back in
You're
Trimaris
back
now.
in Chimeras. Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry. So how
I did a
was
whirlwind tour.
yeah, so you've lived I mean, you've lived in all these different things. I can pull your bio back up, right? But you've lived in Trimaris, Caid, Outlands, Onstiora, Drachenwald. What do you think, having spent time in all those different kingdoms, what have you learned about the SCA? What are the similarities? What are the differences? What are the cool things you took away from all these kingdoms?
uh, I could probably, write a book on all of the similarities and differences and the things that I encountered and everywhere that I went. Every kingdom has its own unique personality, and a lot of times what you think is that kingdom's personality from the outside is very, very different from the inside. I wasn't able to play as much in some of the kingdoms, but others I was very, very active in. Um, so Caid, I was only in for a very short time, but they were all very welcoming. And, I met a lot of really great people, but events there were very interesting because most of them were just like day trips in a park somewhere, very, close to the roots of the SCA. There weren't really a lot of overnight events that we went to. And in Trimaris, I was used to everything being a weekend event. You got there Friday, you could day trip on Saturday, which as a college student who needed more money to spend on SCA events, I could go to more events if I day tripped, because our pricing scale is based on how many days you're going to be at the event. So overnighting costs more money. For a college student, I did some 3 a.m. driving, but it was very different in California because I was, living further away. I had to go crash at somebody's house before going to the event, or I wouldn't be able to get there and back in the day. It takes 3 hours just to drive across LA. So
Mhm.
it make attendance interesting. And then Outlands is such a huge kingdom, and each group is very, very different because that the kingdom is so large. I had trouble playing there because I was in the military and I worked a 7-day-a-week job. So I was often working on the weekends or the day before. So usually if I had the day off on a Saturday, the event was in New Mexico and I lived in Wyoming. So it made it very difficult to go to events because you would need to drive for 4, 6, 8, 13 hours if you lived north to south. So I was in the almost the most northern group in Outlands. So I wish I had more information about that kingdom, but what I experienced was great. And then
All right, and
Onstiora,
Drachenwald. I'm
well, I
curious
gotta say
about
that for
Drachenwald.
last.
Oh, okay.
Everyone
All
always
right.
wants to know about Drakenwald.
Right. Okay.
So
So go ahead about Onstiora.
Onstiora is, I would say, very similar to Trimaris, as much as they might not want that because we fight each other at Gulf Wars. Um, the culture there of how they think about like the war is very different though. But for the most part, lots of camping events, though the events were much less expensive there than in Trimaris. But Drakenwald, of course, everyone wants to hear about Drakenwald. I think when you think of Drakenwald, what do you think of?
Well, I mean, I've heard numerous things about the Drachenwald group in my years in the SCA. I've heard, that it's cool to have events in real castles, but that they're more attuned with being period correct out there
Mhm.
because they have better access to the period resources. So that's what I've heard. I mean, I have friends who live out there and they're just cool people.
Yeah,
So,
they do things that I mean, it's amazing compared to what we have in the States. Like even just the casual authenticity that a lot of people have there. Here we're like, oh, I'm trying really hard to be period. And there it's just like, wow, I feel like I'm there. I'm in the past. Um, But I think it's very interesting. A lot of people think that, they're just really just hard into the authenticity, and everybody is like that, and everybody's going to, call you out if you're not authentic. And, I think people often think that Drakenwald is more like sterile, or more pompous because they have castles and, are where it all started. But I found that they were, just a really welcoming group. And I think one of the most interesting things I did once is, the queen had issued a challenge that she wanted people to write war songs about Drakenwald. And of course, I'm a bard, among other things. And so I said, of course, I can write a song, but I haven't been here very long, so I don't know a lot of stuff to write about. And so when I asked a couple people at an event once, it was like, if I wrote a song about Drakenwald, like, what should I say? And they're like, oh, you should totally say we have castles and we're better than you. Just laughingly, and they're just, not about the pompousness that we have in the States. A lot of times in the stateside SCA, we play a little bit too much into rank, and people think very highly of themselves because of what rank they have. We pay a lot of homage to our crowns with, throughout the days, they've got retainers following them around. They are wearing their crowns all day. They're always on stage. They're always on display. But that's not the case in Drakenwald. In Drakenwald, you probably wouldn't know who the king was until court, if you didn't already know the king. One of my first encounters with one of the kings was when he came up behind me and gave me bunny ears in the evening. And I turned around and I'm like, aren't you the king? But everyone just is really relaxed. They have real royalty there, as they say it, and so they just don't care as much. So I think that the focus there is just on the authenticity, and just on, not even on the authenticity, but on just living the medieval lifestyle. And it's such a different feel from going to an event in the States. There isn't this crazy schedule of a million events and a million meetings that everyone has to go to. It's just people sitting in a castle, sewing, hand sewing, doing their crafts, and just being in the moment in the SCA, as opposed to thinking about what else they need to be doing or how many things they have to do. It's just the laid back feel was just really refreshing. And it really was reinvigorating for me in the SCA to be there. And, I came back with like, I want to focus on the things that are important to me and just enjoy the experience.
Okay, so you did mention bardic arts, so I have to ask about the accidental bardic accidental winning of a bardic competition. How did that happen? Tell me about it.
So my first event, I went and I brought my penny whistle. Because I was that nerdy kid that listened to Celtic music in high school for fun, and I am a flute player mundanely. And so I had a penny whistle and I knew how to play some little Celtic tunes. And I said, oh, I'm going to this medieval event. I'll bring my penny whistle. So I told somebody there, and they were like, oh, you should go enter the bardic competition. I'm like, what's that? They're like, oh, you just, you can go play some songs and just, it'll be fun, and you should go enter. It's like, all right, I guess I'll go enter. No idea of anything. And so I go and I play my little song, and there's a couple other people. It wasn't a big bardic competition. It was just a small baronial competition, and someone did a poem, and there was someone else who I think sang a song. I played my little whistle and I went on with my day, not thinking anything of it. And then I'm just sitting there, like, enthralled by what's going on in court, because I have no idea what's going on. And somebody handed me a bingo card before court, which was very interesting as well. And was like, all right, some herald mispronounces a name. Okay. Then I hear my name get called. I'm like, what do I do? Like, staring around frantically. And I'm like, what? So I guess they liked my penny whistle, and, they wanted to make me their bard. And, I hadn't even been to a bardic circle at that point. I had no idea what bardic was in the SCA, or what was entailed. Afterwards I'm like, well, I guess I'm the baronial bard now. I guess I should go to this bardic circle that's happening. And I know no songs, I know nothing. And I'm like, everyone's singing. I guess I need to learn to sing. Like, what do I do? So it was definitely an interesting way to dive in, and it was kind of like, well, I guess I'm a bard now, and whatever that means.
So
Um,
did you have a lot of people willing to help you though understand what that role entailed, or did you just work with the Baron and Baroness and do what they wanted?
yeah, mostly just worked with the Baron and Baroness. We weren't really big on, Trimaris doesn't really treat their bards the same way as other kingdoms, with making it like a big pompous deal. Um, Everything was kind of more laid back, and so it was kind of like, here's an award, and you get to wear a necklace, and you get a little gift basket, and you get to run the competition next year. So that's about it. It wasn't a big deal. There wasn't a lot of like, oh, you're going to be called on to do things. Of course they did. Oh, you need to go entertain the court. Go, you're the bard. Um, but there wasn't really like a big job to it or anything. Like I've seen in some kingdoms where it's much more of a job to be the baronial bard or the kingdom bard. That wasn't what it was like for me, at least, or I think for a lot of the Trimerian bards. We're kind of a weird little sheep down here in the south. So
So you mentioned you had to learn how to sing. I'm assuming, having heard you sing before, you knew how to sing, but you meant, I'm assuming, sing SCA stuff, or have you really dived
yeah,
into more singing as it because of your interest in the SCA?
I've definitely dived into more singing. I was always an instrumental kid. I was in band, I played flute, I have a minor in music for flute. So the only singing I really ever did was occasionally with my choir friends when we'd sing, Bohemian Rhapsody or something, and like sight singing and music theory classes. So I really hadn't ever performed as a singer. I had no experience. I had experience performing as a musician, but not as a singer. And so I didn't know any repertoire. And so I had to learn all the repertoire. I had to gain a lot of confidence and experience with just learning how to put myself out there in a different role that I wasn't used to any before. And I definitely have grown a lot as a singer since then. I'm glad there are no videos of me singing back then, because I think I would be just utterly embarrassed. But it's taken me a long time, and it's taken me many years to kind of come into my own and find my own style, and really feel out how I work as a performer, both as a singer and as a poet and musician and storyteller within the SCA and within what we look for in an SCA bard.
So bards in the SCA have a pretty bad reputation. And I know that, as in the whole, we can look at every kingdom, and some kingdoms love their bards and some kingdoms don't. What can the bardic community do to help people appreciate and respect them more?
I've never really been in a kingdom where I felt like the bards weren't respected. Um, but I do know kind of what troubles we have in a lot of kingdoms in feeling that Bardic is the redheaded stepchild of arts in the SCA. And certainly I've seen that to some regard. Sometimes it might be hard to find a Bardic circle, or you message the autocrat and you're like, hey, I want to have a Bardic circle. And they're like, oh, we don't have any space. You just kind of got to do your own thing. But I think that part of making ourselves valuable to the populace, and in places where there isn't as much respect, is to really focus on sharing with people, and really make it about what we can offer the kingdom as historians, as chroniclers, as entertainment, and not be so focused on the fact that we need a stage to perform on. A lot of times we need to kind of make a small space before we can demand a big space. And I think a lot of people try to jump all the way to, we need a big stage. And we need to take the steps that need to be taken to get there. We don't build a performance community overnight in a kingdom and we don't build that respect by demanding something that may or may not be there. And part of it, I think, is just we need to promote ourselves to the people who can make some of those decisions. Getting crowns that want to support us, getting barons and baronesses that want to support us. And, those are the ways that we grow, by seeking patronage, just like bards in medieval times would have done. And, being truly enthusiastic in the art that we do, because it's not about us. It's about the art that we're creating and the art that we can make for other people to share. And, we can really make a difference in people's experience of the SCA and of, the dream, if we are putting ourselves in a position where we're making it about everybody else. And I think that, it's hard. But any kingdom I've gone to, I've never felt disrespected for wanting to do performance, and I've never felt like I didn't have a place. But I also come from a very different standpoint from a lot of bards, because I'm also an instrumental musician. I'm also a theater person. I'm also, an educated person, with master's degrees, who does research and who does art sci. And so it's hard if you're a bard that just wants to sing music and, feel like you have a space, because we don't always create a space that's welcoming for the modern medieval, as opposed to the documentably medieval.
Yeah, I know that there have been a lot of, I don't even know that there's a war, a battle, skirmishes between the musicians of the SCA versus the self-identified bards of the SCA. And I've never, it's always confused me that, we both are doing something that was for the most part a period practice, and I never understood why there was animosity between the two. Have you found yourself in a position where you've had to felt in the middle of those two camps?
Not really, but I feel like that dichotomy doesn't exist in a lot of the kingdoms that I've lived in. I know that I've heard that that's more of the experience for people in, your kingdom in the mid realm. I've definitely seen that be people's lived experience of kind of feeling at war. A lot of the places I've been haven't had a large instrumental versus bardic war. Maybe they don't have a lot of instrumental people. I know when I started in Trimaris many years ago, there weren't really a lot of bards and there weren't really a lot of musicians. Performing arts was kind of in in every kingdom, from what I understand. The Trimaris really is a big one for this, has kind of their ups and downs in bardic participation and bardic interest. And the old bards get tired and they don't come out anymore, but there are no new bards take their place. So when I started in Trimaris, I didn't really experience any of that because there wasn't a lot of either. And in Onstiora, I also started there where bardic was in kind of a lull. And, I went, and part of what I did when I was working with the Kingdom Arts Deputy, Minister of Arts and Sciences, was push bardic. But at the same time, we had somebody pushing instrumental music, and I was in both camps, and we never really felt disrespected as bardic performers. And Onstiora has always really liked their kingdom bard as a role. So I really don't feel like that has existed anywhere where I've lived. So it's hard for me to feel like I've been in the middle of that, or to comment on, what it might feel like from that perspective. But I certainly think that there's a place for all of us in the SCA, and the work that bards do in recording our history in song is very much a period practice. The difference is that, it doesn't necessarily fit into a niche. It doesn't really fit into art's eye. How do you document your modern song that didn't exist back then? And I think sometimes we need to step away from our focus on the end of the road, or feeling like there's an end to a road, and focus on the fact that we're doing bardic because we love it and because it's a journey and an experience in itself. And maybe that journey doesn't need an endpoint.
That's a really great point. And of course, I am thinking of Drake Orenwood. Congratulations, by the way, Drake just got a Mont a couple weeks ago, which is a GOA level award. But he wrote a lute piece for a lute and four voices based on other period performances, and I found it was really, I was just incredibly proud of him. He was my apprentice at the time, on the hard work he did to study all the period works and then create a piece that was his own
Mhm.
based on period works. And I would love for, and I think there, and I wonder, I shouldn't say I think, but I do wonder if there would be more appreciation for the Bardic arts if we spent time honing, studying the period repertoire and trying to write pieces based on that, and then having our time and our place for filk and fun and good
Mhm.
times too. But I do wonder sometimes if there would be more respect if bards spent time studying period music and performing those things and writing just like Drake did. I mean, it took him over a year, as far as I know, to write that a really beautiful piece. But I wonder more about that, and I'm just sorry, that's me going down my own little rabbit hole. Okay, so let's
No, I
talk.
think that that's valid though, because, you know, we can't, I think a lot of people want recognition for being a bard. And the only recognition they see as something that is valued is peerage and recognition at ArtSci. And I think part of it is that goes into the culture of the SCA and our kind of obsession with awards and following these paths. And, you know, not every path has to lead in that direction.
Mhm.
And I think that if you want to if you want to follow that path, then that's the path of research like Drake took. He's spending time to write his pieces in a period style. He's learning about the bards of period, and he's able to support, the work that he's doing and with research from the time period. And that's the art side track. That is art side. But you can also be a bard without being on the art side track. And if you just want to sing modern medieval songs, that's wonderful. And, we shouldn't feel forced to be part of the everything must be documentably period
Right.
push. But at the same time, we also might need to recognize that, that path may not lead to the cookie at the end in some kingdoms. And if a kingdom wants to recognize that cookie at the end, that's great. But we shouldn't feel like they have to change their rules to accommodate us. And I think that everybody else has an expectation of research. And at some point on that path, you need to do that research, whether it's just research on the history of bards and the history of trouvères and the work that they actually did in period, and it's writing a research paper. Maybe it's not writing a song. Maybe it's doing the research on the history and teaching classes on the history of the trouvères. It doesn't have to be the same path, and just like a costumer can totally make a ugly Christmas tunic because it's fun, it doesn't diminish their skills as a research driven artisan. We can play both paths as a bard too. We just have to accept that not everything belongs on every path, and it's okay. You are not less for not being recognized in a certain way, because we recognize you in the bardic community. We know the big bards, we know people, we appreciate you, we're going to give you a ring for a performance that we love. We're going to say, oh my gosh, that song is amazing, I want to learn it. And I think part of it is we need to be okay with the appreciation we get from our fellows, you
Right.
know
You are like, that's exactly my stance. Preach, preach, preach. Okay. Subject change. Tell me, for you, which was your first war? Was it Gulf Wars or Pensic War?
My first war was Gulf Wars. I attended Gulf Wars several times before I attended Pensic. When I was in Trimaris, I went to Gulf Wars every year, and it wasn't until I moved to Onstior that I went to Pensic for the first time. So whirlwind experience within my first 5 months of the SCA to go to Gulf Wars, but some people have done Penzic within their first 5 months, which I think is a little crazy.
Yeah, my very first event in the SCA was Penzic.
I can't even imagine the
It,
overwhelming feel of Penzic as a first event.
it really took me a long time to accept events, regular events, as just what they were, because I was expecting parties and drumming and dancing and fight, melee. Yeah, it was
Mm-hmm.
huge. So I want to talk about, there's so many things I want to talk about. So let's talk about Commedia dell'arte, because I know that you have now started performing Commedia dell'arte. Can you tell real quick what Commedia dell'arte is for the people watching who don't know, and then what got you into doing Commedia?
So Commedia dell'arte is 16th century Italian improvised plays, generally comedies, though there are documents of a couple tragedies. They're just not the commonality. And it is performed based with stereotypical characters. So all of the characters fill a stereotype, like the miser, like the know-it-all, like the braggart. Think of Gilligan's Island and how all of those characters are kind of like the personification of a certain type, like the skipper is the skipper and the professor is the professor. Um, and that's kind of like the characters of Commedia dell'arte. And so knowing that, you're able to kind of fall into that role, and you get a scenario, which is basically an outline of a plot. It says scene one, the characters come on stage and talk about this, and that's it. And you're supposed to make up everything as you go. But one of the things that it's built on is things like repeated lines and repeated gags that each troupe will come up with on their own. It's masked comedy, so all of the male older characters wear masks, which makes it kind of easier to get into character and to identify these stereotyped characters. But it's a lot of fun. I got into it by watching my first Commedia show at SCA 50th year. I'd been to Penzic once before. I'd seen Commedia on the schedule, had no idea what it was, and like didn't do anything about it. But at SCA 50, the performing arts community there was a little bit smaller, and I got dragged into doing an improv thing, and they were like, oh, you should come watch this show. And so my first show that I watched was I Verdi Confusi performing their naughty Commedia show, which was a lot of fun. And I was like, oh, that seems kind of interesting and fun. I kind of want to get involved. And so the next year I went to Penzic, and I did my first performance with both I Verdi Confusi, and just minor parts, and just kind of started rolling from there. I've also done one of the Commedia All Stars performances, and it's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy improv comedy. I started doing improv mundanely after I started doing Commedia.
That's something I recommend to people. I did improv for a really long time when I lived out in Miami and then in the Wilmington, Delaware area. And I always tell people, everybody, doesn't matter whether you're an actor or just a regular Joe who doesn't has no interest in it. Everybody should take an improv class.
Oh
Everybody
yeah,
should learn improv because it makes you, I think, a better person all around. Uh,
it's really a good skill because a lot of people are afraid to talk in front of people, and being in an improv situation really builds that confidence. So I definitely think it's very useful for theater people, bards, or just anyone. I
and
teach
that
community classes at Penzic, so come play with me.
Nice. All right. Hopefully, and we're hoping that we will have a Penzic this year.
Oh yes, we hope.
So speaking of Penzic, there's a theater track that you started at Penzic in 2017. Tell me how that came about.
So when Scholastica took over as dean, she had the idea to separate the Commedia and the theater tracks, to allow them to kind of grow a little bit more and focus more on their own little niches. At the time, there were a couple classes that kind of fell into the theater track on its own, but she asked she asked Niccolo Bartolozzi to run it first, but because he was doing some work things, he didn't want to. And so she asked me if I wanted to run it. And I was like, I sure, I guess, because I can't say no. And so I just did a lot of advertising for different things. We created some new events for theater, like a Shakespeare open mic night. We started teaching a lot of improv classes, which we've been expanding every year. And hopefully next year we're going to have even more. I want to do more of like an improv track so people can take more leveled classes rather than just intro to improv every year, which is never a bad thing to work on your skills with new people. But to actually start being able to do classes on like character development and getting into different aspects of improv. But we've also tried to bring more theater. We've really tried to recruit people to do different theater performances. We started the one act experience, which was a way for people to just kind of like Iron Commedia. You come, you take a script, you figure out how to perform it, and you perform it from the script as part of a show, just one act or short scenes. And we've had people submit for their plays to be performed, which hopefully we can continue doing because it lets people try new things and it lets us have a performance outlet for people who write their own theater, which we don't have a lot of outlets for that. Other than known world players, there wasn't previously a lot of opportunities for theater at Penzic if somebody just wanted a short-term commitment. And it's a big jump to go from I maybe have done theater or I'm interested in it to here now go do known world players.
Right.
And so I really focused on trying to get some other opportunities for people to do theater and to learn different aspects and grow those experiences. And hopefully we can continue to grow that. And
Well, I
when
do
it
know
happens again.
the KWP does do a readers theater, so
Mhm.
I wonder if we could get more readers theater kind of experiences too. It'd be nice. But,
Mhm.
then again, we say that and the performing arts tent is always booked solid, so it's hard to get more theater happening.
And even then, going and reading a whole play is still a lot for a new person to want to commit to. And
Yes.
so we really wanted to get more like taster level, like the one act experience. We're doing 15-minute skits. So we want that to be, it's a 1 day commitment, but it's also looking at the actual acting. So it's also kind of a step up because readers theater, you're not learning anything about blocking or you're not learning anything about how do I face the audience, which way do I stand. So this gives us an opportunity to go from intro to theater class 101, where you're taught to project and stand a certain way for the audience, to actually give people an opportunity to try those skills prior to kind of moving up to doing full-length shows. And I certainly am always looking for ideas of what we can do to kind of bridge that gap. Readers theater is a wonderful opportunity for people, but it's kind of daunting to do a
Yeah.
2-hour play,
Yeah,
from
it is.
scratch.
You're right. Yeah. And it's also, you look at that sort of stuff and it's also such a huge time commitment because you can't just stand up and do, and we did at the event that shall not be named last summer at Cooper's Lake, we did do a staged reading of, I can't even remember what the heck we did right now. And we ended up having like 10 or 11 people, and we just, everybody just grabbed a script and said what they wanted to read, and everybody did some readings, and it was really a lot of fun. But normally you do a little more prep work,
Yeah.
for what turned into just a bunch of Shakespeare geeks sitting around reading Shakespeare to each other. Gosh, what did we do? I'm gonna never remember. I'll have to if Lucas was here, but no, he's abandoned me. All right, so tell me about Corallus Pensicus.
So the Corallus Pensicus
Thank
is
you.
a offshoot of Known World Choir, and they hold auditions every year to audition for the choir, mostly to make sure that you just can hold your part in a choir, because it's a smaller ensemble, and it's also a chance for them to take notes on your voice. So when they're building the choir every year, they can, pick the right voice qualities for the parts or the songs that they're singing. And then once whoever's directing that year picks the people from the people that are interested. And it's the kind of thing that once you're in, you're in. So you audition once, you are on the list, and then each Penzic they pick people who are able to make the rehearsals, and they kind of make the choir from there. It's an opportunity to do more complicated period music. A lot of times they do longer pieces than the known world choir would do. And they often will do more parts. So normally you'll get your 4 or 5 part pieces, but they've done, the 10-part pieces. So the more advanced literature. So it's basically an opportunity for them to keep known world choir very free, open, welcoming for everybody. Anybody can join known world choir. You don't have to have any experience. You don't have to know how to read music. But Chorales Pensic is just that next step up for people that are interested in exploring, more in-depth and advanced music. And it was a great experience the year I did it. I've only actually performed with that 1 year, but it was a great experience because I would have never performed some of those pieces otherwise.
So do you sleep at Pensic? Like,
Uh,
do you ever
Not
stop?
really. Honestly, I have gotten really good at events on functioning on very little sleep, and then I get home and I am just dead and crashed for like a week.
I always tell
Um,
people I need a vacation from my vacation. They just don't
I
understand Pensic.
I
Yeah.
really do. I really do, because I go and I hit it hard like the whole week. My goal is to step back a little bit in future Pensics, because I definitely am not as young as I used to. I mean, I'm not super old or anything, but my 22-year-old self could sure do a lot more than my 36, etc. year old self. And that makes a big difference in my energy levels. And I really want to try to focus on less things. For example, trying to do known world players and known world choir in the same year is not a good idea.
No.
It's just it's hard.
So I know that though, theater and the Bardic arts are not the only things that you're interested in the SCA. What else do you do?
Um, a large majority of what I do nowadays is performance arts focused. I'm trying to push choir or push instrumental music. I play harp, I play recorder. So it's a big part of what I do. But I have dabbled in many other things over the years. I would say I'm one of those people that can't say no to a new hobby, which means the SCA is very dangerous because it is a hobby made of many hobbies. So people will be like, oh, do you want to learn how to spin? Yes, I do. Oh, I'm doing card weaving. Teach me. So everything that I have possibly stumbled across has been something that I have tried to learn at some point or dabbled in. So I've dabbled in fiber. I make my own garb. And I've, taught a little bit of garb classes. I do a lot with historical linguistics. Mundanely, I have a master's in linguistics. And so I like to, I've dabbled in heraldry and name heraldry, and doing name research. That was one of the first things I actually did in the SCA. I had researched and submitted my own name within about 5 months of joining, because I was a nerd who liked to research those things. I have done probably the most I've dabbled in, like seriously, is cooking. I really enjoy cooking, mundanely and in the SCA. So I've done some like fundraiser breakfasts or lunches before, and I have done one fully period feast from 2 15th century cookbooks. So I have a couple other things that I do, but recently I've been mostly focused on just doing the things I really enjoy, and that's setting myself up at an event and playing harp all day.
Right.
Here,
So,
come sing or play with me.
one of the things you mentioned before we get to our last question, where you said you are the the deputy for Trimeris Royal University, which you ran online. So how is that going? Is that something
Um,
that's still happening? Is this a weekly, monthly classes
well,
being
it's
held, or is it just an
so
event?
it's a single event. So Trimeris Royal University happens once a year. It's the Royal University. So I'm the deputy that's in charge of that. It's called the TRU Chancellor. And so I, did that for the first time. I had just come off Bardic War, and TRU was like a month and a half later. And so I was very heavily involved in running all the Bardic War, and I did a lot of relaying with our Kingdom Arts and Sciences officer, because she was also a very established bard, Ambra. A lot of people may be familiar with some of her music, which is amazing and fantastic, and can be purchased on Ravensboy Music. She's awesome. But she was like, hey, I need a new deputy for TRU. Would you be interested? I'm like, I mean, I just spent like 40 hours a week on Bardic War for the past month. I'm not really sure if I'm ready to take on another event. But it's not a huge event to run, you know, and just I'm one of the artside deputies for Trimaris. I run the event every year. For this one, I brought in guest teachers from around the known world. So I tried to have teachers from, I think I had 8 different kingdoms that I featured as teachers. Drake Orenwood was one of my featured teachers. So just a variety of people that I've met over the years who could bring their knowledge of different and interesting subjects to the Kingdom of Trimaris. And then now that real life events are started again, we'll probably do working with we have another deputy that's in charge of expos, which is trying to set up more display options for people to share their art. We'll probably start setting up kind of like mini TRU sessions where we feature classes, that kind of thing. So my goal is to just use that position to bring more teaching and classes, and also, you know, use it to plot my evil, vicious plans to bring more music and performing arts to Trimaris. My underlying goal and everything.
All right, believe it or not, we're almost out of time. So it is time
So
for the final. It always does, and then I think, how am I gonna talk for an hour with somebody? And here we are. It's 8:47.
Well, you know, you get 2 theater nerds together.
Yes, and so I do want to mention one thing before we get to the last question. So I keep looking at your adorable hat. And I remember your posts back when we were still doing events in person, and every time you would go to an event, you'd forget them. So everywhere you went, you were going to buy cloth to make new hats. So
I have made several of these by hand at this point because yeah,
no,
I always forget.
it looks adorable. Like I think I remember you sharing a picture of the one you're wearing, and I was like, oh, I remember her making that the day
I
of an
made this
event.
one in the car on my way to an event in Texas, like 6.5 hours south. I said, I can make a hat in that time, because my cat had unfortunately peed on my previous hat.
Oh no.
They're little brats. But yeah, I made another one on the way to the Bardic, the most recent known world cooks and bards, because I flew up there and forgot my hat. So thank you,
Forgot your
Walmart,
hat.
for having
Yeah.
felt.
It looks awesome. All right. So here is the final question that everybody gets asked. What can the SCA do better?
It's always a hard one that I think I probably could say very little or say a lot. I think I kind of touched on one of my kind of talking points, you know, on things that I think people can do better earlier, and that is putting more focus on our own personal experience and living this medieval lifestyle, and less focus on what it's going to get us in the end. And a lot of this really came out of my experiences in Drakenwald, because when I went to Drakenwald, I was burnt out. You know, I was always entering artside competitions and constantly felt like I had to do new things, and constantly felt like I had to show everyone that, oh, I can do these things, because we're told that, you know, we need to be on a path. You join up and the first thing people say are, it's like, oh, well, do you want to be a knight? Do you want to do service? Do you want to do arts? And I think somewhere along the way, we forget that we're there because it's something that we were interested in, and that it theoretically is a passion that we have. And so being in Drakenwald, I really was able to, you know, I didn't know anyone. I wasn't going to be there for very long. I didn't have a local group, though I kind of semi tried to start one, because I can't say no. But, you know, I was able to just go to events and just be present at the event. and work on my hand sewing, or just sit at the feast in this castle and just enjoy the company of other people. And I feel like a lot of people really lose the fact that this is something we do for fun, and when we do things for fun, it should be because we enjoy them. And people get so driven to be successful in the SCA that they forget that it's a journey, and that journey doesn't have to have an endpoint. And just because you achieve something, it doesn't mean the journey is over. And I feel like we put so much stock in our titles and our paths that we're not taking time to just be, which
Right.
is why, now I'm like, I went to a kingdom event and people were like, oh, do you want to teach a class? And I go, nope, I'm going to sit in a corner, I'm going to play my harp, and I'm going to invite people to come play music with me. And I ran a spontaneous bardic circle, and I just played music during court, during whatever I could. And that's what brings me fulfillment and joy, is adding to the ambiance of the SCA, and being able to just be present and enjoy myself. And we don't have to be about the end game. There is no end game. It's just all a game. And I think that one thing we could just do better is encourage people to just let the path take them where it takes them, instead of feeling like when they join, we have to immediately be like, oh, and you can do art side. Oh, and you can be a knight. Oh, and you can do rapier, and make them feel pressured to pick a path.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people are always trying to get people to come do their thing, but wouldn't it be great if we just wanted people to do what they liked, and encourage people to do more than one thing, instead of feeling like they had to spend all their time fighting because they have to be a knight and their knight tells them that they need to practice more, so they need to do pickups all day. Well, maybe that person would also like to go work in the kitchen sometime. Maybe they like cooking, but they feel pressured to be on this path. And I think a lot of people would find a lot more enjoyment if they weren't pressured to just be on the path. So I think taking a step back from our rank, and taking a step back, and just let's have an event where the whole thing is, you don't bring your regalia to this event. You bring your crafts, you bring your fun, you bring your friends, you set up your camp, you sit around the fire, and you just remember why you joined the SCA in the first place. And,
Amen.
and I think that's what we need more of.
That's why the event that shall not be named that was at Cooper's Lake this summer was the best, because there was nobody had any rank or title, and it was
Mhm.
sitting around everybody's camp, drinking and just talking and visiting, and there was no laurels or knights, didn't matter.
Yeah,
So
just
that's a
everyone
great
just
reminder.
was.
And maybe that's why that event was so much fun, because there wasn't that pressure for anybody to do anything. So, okay. You are so awesome, and I'm so glad that you agreed to be a guest on the show.
I'm so happy you invited me. It was a lot of fun.
Again, I was talking with Avalyn, Inyan, Davi, and we'll be back. I don't think we'll be back in 2 weeks. No, because that's the 30th. So we'll be back in January, and we'll post stuff on our Facebook page about that. Thank you again, Evelyn. You're awesome. Have a wonderful holiday. Everybody watching, have a wonderful holiday. And this is Zoph and Evelyn signing off. Simply SCAdian. No title required.